Good day, everyone, and welcome to New Jersey City University's Talks of Tomorrow webinar series. My name is Tara Rogala, and I'm the administrator for the Office of Adult and Continuing Ed. I'm joined by my colleagues, Selena Shea, Marketing Data and Analyst, Nicole Valencia Flores, Social Media Marketing Manager. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to our international trade webinar titled Tariffs, What You Need to Know About Them. A couple of housekeeping rules before we begin. This webinar is being recorded, so please be mindful of your audio and video settings, as well as any personal or sensitive information you share. We request that all microphones are muted during the presentation. However, there will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end, so please type your questions in the chat or wait till the Q&A sessions, and at that time, your questions will be answered. I just want to take a quick moment to introduce us to our webinar presenter for the day. I have the honor of introducing you to Professor Martin Ken Behr III, Esquire. Professor Behr is a customs and international trade lawyer with the law office of Martin K. Behr. He's admitted to practice in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, and before the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey and the U.S. Court of International Trade. He received a BA degree from Rutgers University, an MPA degree from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and a JD from Rutgers School of Law. He's also a licensed U.S. Customs broker, one who is actively engaged in the profession for several years. A former U.S. Customs officer, senior inspector, and import specialist, Martin was stationed at land, air, and seaports of entry. While with U.S. Customs at the Port of New York, Newark, he was also a member of the agency's export control branch. Martin is a distinguished graduate of both the U.S. Federal Law Enforcement Center and the U.S. Customs Service Academy. Martin is also a former special agent with the U.S. Department of Defense, assistant prosecutor with the Office of Hudson County, New Jersey prosecutor, and executive with the Global FMC Licensed Ocean Transportation Intermediary. He was also an international trade consultant with UNS & Co., and taught international trade subjects at Pace University, Fashion Institute of Technology, and Baruch College in New York City. Martin is of counsel to the Customs and International Trade Law firm of GRVR Attorneys, LLC, Dallas, Texas. Thank you, and make welcome Professor Martin K. Behr.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Tayo, thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm glad you're here today. Tariffs are very much in the news today. And if you turn on your television, go to any station and people are talking about tariffs. But there's a lot of misunderstanding about tariffs. And the idea of you being here today is to learn about what tariffs are and what they're not. So if we can begin right now, I'd like to take you through tariffs. We're going to discuss what they do, what they don't do, and where you can go for information about tariffs and other international trade-related matters. So please feel free to ask questions at the end of the presentation. We're going to take time out to do that. But as far as a tariff goes, if you look at your screen, you're going to see that word. Tariff is nothing more than tax. And it's the term tariff comes to us through the Arabic language, and it went through Italy and France and so on. But it is nothing more than a term for tax, an import tax or duty. And that's it. In simplest terms, a tariff is a tax. Slide one, please. Yeah, go back. Yeah, it's a tax. And again, when goods come into the United States, who pays the tax? Is it a foreign country or a foreign entity that's going to be able to pay the tax? No, that would be prohibited by law. People here in the United States have to pay that tax. And the person who's going to be responsible when it comes to paying this duty or tariff or tax to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, who, again, this is the agency that collects tariffs or taxes, well, it's going to be somebody known as an importer of record. And that's somebody here in the United States. On rare occasions, it may be we can set up things a little differently, but virtually all the time, it's somebody here. And the importer pays the tax. And by paying the tax, it has all kinds of ramifications, and we're going to talk about that. But the United States has a schedule of duties or taxes. And again, they come to us through the United States government. There's a great big book called The Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States. And if you printed out the pages of this book, well, you'd wind up with about 16 and a half pounds of pages having to do with tariffs. How much something is worth, how much something is going to be taxed when it comes into the United States. So again, when it comes to tariffs, they're on imported goods only. The United States Constitution is explicit when it comes to exported goods. They can't be taxed. And we're going to talk about who is able to apply tariffs to goods coming into the United States. And things have changed over the past 50 years or so. Next slide, please. Yeah, next. Yeah. Who collects tariffs? As I mentioned before, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection collects tariffs on those goods that are coming into the United States. And U.S. Customs and Border Protection is part of the Department of Homeland Security. It's been that way since 2003. Before that, Customs used to be part of the Treasury Department, but now it's part of DHS. And you can find current tariff rates if you're interested in a harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. And you can find that online. It's a book that you might want to get for yourself if you're interested in studying for, say, the customs broker's examination or you have a company. It's good to make use of hard copy information, but you can download the harmonized tariff schedule, and we're going to talk more about it. But that's where you find these rates. And who has the power to levy tariffs in the United States? Well, traditionally it was Congress. And it was so basically up until the 1970s. Again, when it comes to the power to levy tariffs, there's an Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and it states that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. But Congress has repeatedly shifted its powers, and it shifted its powers towards the executive branch of government. That is, it's shifted the powers to the president. And beginning in 1917, they had something called the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, the president can impose any tariff while the nation is at war. We're not at war right now. And the affected trade does not have to be connected to the ongoing war. And since 1974, the Trade Act of 1974 is something that allows the president to impose a 15% tariff for 150 days if there's an adverse impact on national security from imports. Now, if you've been paying attention to the news, you realize that President Trump is predicating these tariff increases on fentanyl. He doesn't like the fact that fentanyl is coming into the United States, and he doesn't like the fact that undocumented immigrants are coming into the United States. So he's saying, for this reason, I'm going to start imposing tariffs, at least with respect to Canada and Mexico. And there's going to be a lot more news come April 2nd. That's when you can expect a lot more in terms of what the United States government's prepared to do with tariffs. But you have to realize since 1977, there was something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and that shifted even more powers towards the White House. And the Trump administration claims that it gives the president the authority to raise tariffs without any limits during a national emergency of any kind. And the president is saying we do have a national emergency. We have fentanyl coming into the country, and we have undocumented aliens coming into the country. So that's the emergency. So again, legal scholars disagree with the president's thoughts with respect to this act. Because the act that I'm talking about, 1977, the International Emergency Economics Powers Act, it doesn't mention tariffs at all and transfers no authority of tariffs towards the president. So legal scholars have real doubts about this 1977 act that the president is pointing to. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, you just heard me talk a little bit about the Constitution of the United States. It was Congress. Congress used to be the entity. It used to be the branch of government that had everything to say about tariffs, but that changed a while ago. And again, remember that it's Congress that should have the power, but it gave away a lot of this. And that's why a lot of people are upset with Congress. Congress is very much reviled in the eyes of a lot of Americans. And Congress has been giving away powers for a long time, not only when it comes to tariffs, but the ability to declare war. That's a power that Congress has. And then Congress used to be very jealous of the power of the purse when it comes to it, talking about money or setting down money for this program or that program or this and that. It should be Congress. Okay. But we see that things are in a state of flux right now, and things today are not what they used to be a short while ago. Next slide, please. Okay. Congress, not the president, was vested with the power to levy tariffs. And at the time of ratification, everybody expected that the first taxes from Congress would be imposts. That's a word you may come across. And an impost is just a tariff on imported goods. And that's what happened with the tariff of 1789. One of the first things that the new government, the United States, wanted to do was have the ability to tax under the Articles of Confederation before that, before we had a national government, in the present form, it didn't have the power to tax. It had to beg for money. And that's not something it really wanted to do. So again, President Trump has increased tariffs right now, largely in the range of 10% to 25%. And we're going to know a lot more on April 2nd. Okay, but there's a lot going on with Canada, Mexico, China, and even the European Union. We're talking about tariffs now on aluminum and steel products, and they may be, in some cases, talk about 100%, 250% tariffs. It's not clear what's going on right now. The president seems to be using tariffs to have other nations revamp their laws and their attitude towards the United States. And again, tariffs can be very powerful. They're supposed to be set down, with respect to the World Trade Organization, the Department of Commerce, etc. But right now we're living in a time of flux. Okay, things are changing, and we'll know a lot more on April 2nd. Next slide, please. Again, we talked about the Constitution. The Constitution is explicit as to who's supposed to have the power to levy tariffs, and that's Congress. But that's not happening. Next slide, please. Okay, and next slide. Okay. Again, why is this happening? Why is Congress giving away authority, powers and so on? Well, they're migrating for a number of reasons. Congress did not particularly like dealing with tariffs. I remember when I was a young boy, I went to Washington, D.C. with my grandparents, and what I heard in the Senate was talk about tariffs. I don't know, maybe it had a great impact on my life. I take it did, but nobody looks to Congress anymore for a lot of things. And again, as I mentioned, it's reviled. And it's right now the president is using powers that were, with Congress at one time. So Congress, again, as I mentioned, got into the tariff business, or gave up the tariff business, I should say, with the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. And again, there's another act that goes back to 1974 that the president is largely predicating his actions upon. And that is if there's a national emergency. And the president is pointing to fentanyl coming into the United States. And again, the flow of, undocumented aliens, undocumented people. Next slide, please. Okay, why do we have tariffs? And what kind of trade barriers are used to keep things out of the United States? Tariffs or taxes are often created to protect infant industries and developing economies, but they're also used by more advanced economies with developed industries. And we have a number of reasons why tariffs are used, and I've indicated 5 of them. One is to protect domestic employment, and that's a lot of people right now rooting for increased tariffs, but they don't really understand what it means. And again, tariffs have become highly politicized in this country, and the possibility of increased competition from imported goods can threaten domestic industries. A lot of Americans are upset over what happened over the last 50 years, something called neoliberalism. A lot of our factories, a lot of our companies migrated. They went overseas. Many of them went to China. Nobody forced them to go, but they realized they could make more in terms of profit by setting up operations overseas. And during that time, shipping costs declined. It was a lot easier to ship goods into the United States. And the United States has been championing what's known as free trade. The average rate of duty, if we're not talking about these special tariffs, is about 1.3 to 1.5%. Now, that's not a lot. Right before and during World War II, the average rate of duty, in many cases, at 50-something percent. We were out to protect industry here. We had also gone through the Great Depression. And the idea was to protect industries, and therefore they would be able to give employment to people. And again, after World War II, the United States began to reverse itself and say, no, we believe in free trade. And that's what people in the United States have been experiencing for the last 50 years. Again, employment has gone overseas, at least in terms of creating goods. we know where a lot of our goods are coming from? They're coming from China. They're also coming in from Vietnam. They're coming in from all kinds of countries right now. And there's a lot of places in the United States that are suffering, or at least people are suffering because they don't have enough employment. However, it's not just the jobs and the factories migrating overseas. Now we have to worry about automation and we have to worry about artificial intelligence. But the reasons a lot of companies originally went overseas because there were no unions, there were no environmental worries, it was cheap labor. Okay, so they migrated, and in many cases, they were given help by the government to go overseas. And now we're living with the results. And the results were a lot of angry people out there, especially in the Midwest, down south, but here in the Northeast as well. People want employment, they want steady work. They want to, they want regularity in their lives. They don't want gig employment. And they think that these increased tariffs may be a way of bringing manufacturing back to the United States. But we do know we do protect domestic employment like that. And that's one of the reasons that the president is advocating the way he is. Next slide, please. Protecting consumers. As I mentioned, a lot of people are in favor of tariffs. They say, great, let's not buy goods from abroad. In some cases, that's possible. Maybe this can be something known as substitution. But in many cases, if we're in North America, there are a lot of products that we can't get. So, a government may levy a tariff on products that it feels could endanger its population. And that's true too. For example, I give an example here of South Korea. South Korea may place a tariff on imported beef from the United States. Everybody remember mad cow disease? Well, it's a real worry to people in certain parts of the world. And our Korean ally very much was worried about such a thing, right? And so it balked about receiving certain products. And that's why sometimes governments create tariffs and they apply them to goods coming into the country because they may be harmful to people. Next slide, please. Infant industries. At one time, we had fledgling industries here, the new industries. And again, quite often they want protection. They want to make sure that they can survive. They're worried about goods coming in from abroad, goods that can produce more cheaply than American industries here. And this is something that they ask the government for. Please help us. Let's keep out certain goods because we want this industry or that industry to survive and thrive. All right, next slide, please. National security. This is, in large part what President Trump is advocating right now, that we have to protect people here in the United States. We have to protect them from what? Not just goods that could harm them. We're talking about consumer goods, but also such things as fentanyl. We don't want it here. And we don't want, undocumented aliens. Now, is it really possible to stop all the drug importation? No. I was a customs officer. I know that. But again, this is what he's saying, that this is the reason that there are certain tariffs are going into effect. And again, national security, according to the government, is vital. The state interests and people need to be protected. Next slide, please. Retaliation. Countries may also set tariffs as a retaliation technique. And if you've been watching the news, you see that is about to happen with a number of countries. A number of countries have also backed down. They're talking with the United States right now about the tariffs. But certain countries are going to say, listen, if you're going to hurt us, we're going to hurt you. And we've recently been listening to, I think it's Premier Ford of Ontario, Canada, and again, about tariffs on electricity, and about, again, you may want to cut off electricity to the United States. And again, for Canada is set to impose its own tariffs on goods that are coming into Canada from the United States. But there's retaliation for a number of reasons. Give an example here of France. If France believes that the United States has allowed its wine producers to call its domestically produced sparkling wine champagne, a name specific to the Champagne region of France, for too long, it may levy a tariff on imported meat from the United States. All right, next slide, please. All right, there are several types of tariffs and barriers that a government can employ. And one of them are known as specific tariffs. And a tariff, again, is a tax. And if you get this great big book that I told you about, the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States, you'll realize that everything that comes into the United States can be categorized. It can have a number. And the number that the United States government wants importers to use is 10 digits long. And the customs brokers, those are intermediaries, those are people who help importers bring goods into the United States, are going to help the importer with this tariff number, this harmonized number. Now, it's up to the importer to get this number right. And again, why? Because the United States predicates tariff rates upon this 10-digit number. And if you don't get the number right, even if the United States is not losing money, you can get into trouble. You don't want to be known if you're an importer as an import violator. That's something. But again, what is a specific tariff? It's a fixed fee levied on one unit of an imported good, and it's referred to as a specific tariff. And the tariff can vary according to the type of good imported. I give an example here. For example, a country could levy a $15 tariff or tax on each pair of imported men's leather shoes. But that country can also levy a $300 tariff on imported laptop computers. Or it can levy a specific tariff of, say, 6 cents a kilogram on, say, black cherries, country of origin, Chile. So again, how do these tariffs come about? Well, quite often through negotiation, and we have a number of free trade agreements with countries around the world. We have 14 of them right now. And a lot of goods come into the United States free of duty. And the idea is to help certain countries around the world develop. But we do have something known as specific tariffs, and that is it's going to be so much, so many cents or so many dollars a pound or a kilo or a square foot of something. That's called a specific tariff. Next page, please. Then we have something ad valorem, and this is the most popular type of tariff or tax. And the phrase ad valorem is Latin, and it just means according to value. And this type of tariff is levied on goods based on a percentage of the goods value. For example, an ad valorem tariff would be 15% tariff levied by Japan on U.S. automobiles. The 15% is a price increase on the value of the automobile. So if you want to bring in an automobile from Japan and it's worth $10,000, well, it's now going to cost $11,500. That's if it's going to be to the Japanese consumers. And the price increase protects domestic producers from being undercut. And you probably heard a lot of this about automobiles. The United Auto Workers is very upset about what may happen here in the United States if there are increased tariffs on automobiles or automobile parts coming into the United States. It does increase the cost for American consumers because when a tariff is applied to an item coming into the United States, the cost of that tax, that tariff, is going to be passed upon to the consumer. So you keep hearing this stuff that outsiders, that foreign countries or foreign entities are going to pay tariffs. That's not so. That would be prohibited by law. It's going to be somebody here in the United States paying that tariff. And then the cost of that tariff or tax gets shifted to you, the consumer. And right now, there are, some entities out there that are trying to estimate how much it's going to cost the American public if a lot of these tariffs go into effect. Some people say it's going to cost a family anywhere from $850 to perhaps $1,200 a year extra. They got to take that out of their pockets if they want to buy things in the store. You all go to Walmart and you realize that in Walmart, what do you have? You really don't have any U.S. products there. Maybe a couple of candy bars you can find that are made here, but that's about it. Just about everything comes from overseas, China in particular, also Vietnam, but also Turkey. I mean, there's a number of countries that these goods are coming in. People don't really look when they pick up an item to buy. They don't see the country of origin. They don't look for the label. But we don't produce here domestically like we used to. We're dependent upon imports. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, compound tariffs. What is a compound tariff? Compound tariff is simply, it's based on ad valorem, it's a percentage of the value of the goods coming into the United States, and a specific tariff or tax. It's a two-part tax or two-part tariff. An example, certain wristwatches imported to the United States can face a 51-cent specific tariff as well as a 6.25% ad valorem tariff on the case and strap and a 5.3% ad valorem tariff on the battery. Watches sometimes can be very complicated. You have to watch it with bringing them in because several different types of tariffs apply to them. And in this case, where you have three different types of tariffs, it should really be known as a three-part tariff. Next slide, please. We have something called anti-dumping duties. Some of you may have heard about this. And what does it mean when there's anti-dumping? There's an allegation. Usually domestic industries here claim that goods are coming into the United States at less than fair market value. They're coming in too cheap. And quite often, these allegations indicate that exporters are receiving help from other exporters, where they may be receiving help from a government. That's called a countervailing duty. But they're receiving help to send the goods into the United States too cheaply. Okay, they're coming in at less than what's known as fair market value. And this is a protectionist tariff. It's also sometimes it can be very high. It could be hundreds of percent of duty with respect to an item coming in. And it's called anti-dumping. And dumping is, again, it's a process where a company exports a product at a price lower than the price it normally charges in its home market. Who makes a determination that it's anti-dumping? Well, there are investigations conducted, and then finally the Commerce Department says to Customs, you're going to act like a cop, and you have to collect these taxes on certain goods coming into the United States. And we do have a lot of anti-dumping duties, so beware. Before you bring something into the country, find out if it's subject to anti-dumping duties. Next slide, please. We have something called a countervailing duty, which is a lot like an anti-dumping duty. Again, it's applied to goods that are alleged to come into this country at less than fair market value. But when it comes to a countervailing duty, there's an allegation that a foreign government is involved, and this foreign government is giving aid, maybe helping out exporters, overseas exporters, to send the goods into the United States, maybe giving them money, maybe giving them help in other forms. But again, because this happens and that the allegation is sustained by the US government, the Department of Commerce is going to advise Customs to stop certain goods coming in from certain countries where it's been determined that countervailing duties are due. And this is a sort of a penalty. Okay. Again, the idea is that we want a level playing field for our industries here. The idea is, why should goods come in too cheaply? We don't want to undercut the industry here, so often you wind up with a countervailing duty. Okay, so it's just a tax, and it's again by the importing country on imported products. Next slide, please. Non-tariff trade barriers. Yeah, there's other things besides tariffs that can prevent goods from coming into the United States, and I want to mention them to you. I want you to know that if you want to go into the importing business, you want to become an importer, you don't need a license. The government's going to put you on an honest system. You do have to do certain things. You have to keep records, yes, but you don't need a license. But for some of the goods that you want to bring into the United States, you may need a license or a permit. And before that item can come in, you have to have the right kind of permit. Okay, and this quite often you see this with respect to imported cheeses. Licenses are granted to certain companies, allowing them to act as importers. And this creates a restriction on competition and increases prices. Next slide, please. Import quotas. Sometimes there's only so much that you can bring of an item into the United States at a certain level. That would be called an absolute quota. Once you reach a certain level, you can't bring in any more. Absolute quotas, I don't think there are any right now, but there are something called tariff rate quotas, that if the United States hits a certain level, or a certain number of goods come into the United States, anybody else who wants to bring goods in are going to have to pay more money than usual to bring the goods into the country. So there are import quotas, okay, but they're called tariff rate quotas. All right, next slide, please. And here we are, tariff rate quota I mentioned. Tariff rate quotas, it's a two-tiered tariff scheme in which the tariff rate changes depending on the level of imports. And below a specific value or quantity of imports, a lower rate applies. But once you hit a certain level, well, that's when new price structures, new schedule kicks in, and you're going to have to pay more money. Next slide, please. Voluntary export restraints, we've had this. Some countries hold off bringing certain products or exporting certain products to us in the United States. So again, they voluntarily export because they don't want to get in trouble. Next slide, please. Local content, sometimes it can bring in goods into the United States at a free rate of duty if the goods are made a certain way and certain requirements are observed and the goods are brought directly into the US. Next slide, please. Who benefits from tariffs? I'm just going to say the tariffs are uneven. Tariff is a tax. And unfortunately for consumers here in the United States, they're going to get hit because tariff costs are passed upon to the consumer. Next slide, please. Short run, higher prices for goods can reduce consumption. And you're going to see that in the United States. A lot of people are going to cut back on certain goods. And certain businesses can profit, and the government sometimes can see an increase in revenue. However, when it comes to tariffs, please remember this. Only 2 to 3% of government revenue comes from tariffs. Okay, come customs, collecting duties or taxes. Most of the money comes from the IRS. Okay, next slide, please. Next, yeah. Do tariffs affect prices? Absolutely. There's denial with respect to that, but there's also certain admissions from the government lately. They realize that it's going to be a period of perhaps perhaps of change, and this has been talked about by the government. But things are going to get kind of sticky for a while if these tariffs go into effect, and the American consumer is going to pay more for certain items. Next slide, please. True or false? Tariffs are much less important measures of protection than they used to be. That's false. Then I give a definition of a tariff war, and that's what the United States is currently engaged in. And that's when one nation increases tariffs on goods imported or exported from another country. But just remember, when we export goods from the United States, no tariffs are allowed. The Constitution prevents that, or prohibits it. Next slide, please. Okay, we have something known as reciprocal tariffs. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we're going to see what's going to happen on April 2nd. And the president right now is threatening certain countries, saying that, listen, when your goods come into the United States, we're going to tax them at the rate that you tax our products going into your country. Basically, it's tit for tat. And certain countries do have high tariffs, just like the United States has certain high tariffs on certain products. But reciprocal means basically mirror image. We're going to do to you what you were trying to do to us. Okay, next slide. Okay, so Trump has stated, I have decided for purposes of fairness that I will charge a reciprocal tariff, meaning whatever countries charge the United States of America, we will charge them. No more, no less, unquote. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so again, Trump has had for many decades, believes the United States, said for many decades that he believes the United States is being treated unfairly in global trade. And he stated that because many countries impose tariffs on American goods than the United States does on theirs, this creates an imbalance. So certain countries may have to worry. And one of these countries, believe it or not, is India. I mean, we talk a lot about China, but India also has to worry about certain products. So does Brazil. So does any number of countries out there. Next slide, please. Okay, the economists have pointed out that the United States benefits from having a large trade imbalance, and that's something we can talk about. I don't have time right now, but many of you look up BRICS. Okay, Brazil, Russia, India, um, again in South America, and a number of other countries. Cuba recently joined. Right now, there's a lot of countries that don't want to use the American dollar when it comes to international trade, and things are going to change very shortly, and it's something that you should pay attention to if you're involved in international trade. BRICS. Okay. So next slide, please. Okay. U.S. federal authorities have given 180 days in early February to identify countries that impose higher tariffs. And certain people in the government are doing this. And again, I keep mentioning April 2nd, and that's when the Department of Commerce is going to come out and give us more in the way of information about who's going to get hurt and who's not. Next slide, please. Okay, reciprocal tariffs can be invoked for reasons of national security. President Trump is doing this. And again, certain places in the world can be hard hit, and that includes India, Argentina, much of Africa, and Southeast Asia. Okay, and they point out Brazil. Brazil may be subject to an 18% rate on ethanol. Okay, next slide, please. Will they benefit? Will American producers and retailers benefit? We'll see, but most won't. Some will, but most won't. Next slide, please. Trump's use of tariffs have ratcheted up fears of global trade war. A lot of people are trying to avoid that. The Wall Street Journal this morning went on about trade wars. We don't need that. A lot of businesses, especially American businesses, don't want this. They want certainty. That's what most business people need, certainty. Next slide, please. Okay, we also have problems with the World Trade Organization, or we'd say the American government does, because certain actions have been taken that are in violation of World Trade Organization rules. And that's going to be looked at too. You're going to hear more in the news about that. Next slide, please. Okay, listen, I want to thank you. I had to run through a number of slides. There's a lot of information out there, but just remember this, that a tariff is a tax. Who pays the tax? People here in the United States are going to pay on tariffs that are imposed upon goods coming into the country. The foreigners do not pay. American interests, American companies and people pay that. So right now, I'd like to, again, I want to thank Tayo, otherwise known as Rhoda, for her kindness and the other people at New Jersey City University. I'm very honored. I'm very privileged to be able to, present to you. But she's going to give more information about classes that are going to be conducted here at NJCU. NJCU is one of the few schools now in the New York metropolitan area that have anything to do with international trade. So I'll let Tayo explain to you what's going on right now.
Thank you so much, Martin, for such an informative session. But before we wrap up, we will be taking questions and answers. So please do not be in a hurry out. I'm sure that there's some information that you can learn during the Q&A session. But before we wrap up today's webinar, I want to take a moment to share an exciting opportunity with you all. NJCU will be offering an import and export agent training program designed to equip you with the knowledge and skills needed to succeed in international trade. Whether you're looking to start a new career, expand your business, or simply learn more about global commerce, this program is a great way to get started. The dates are March 24th through May 8th, and it'll be Monday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 6 to 8 p.m. For more details, registration, and payment, you can simply scan the QR code on our screen or click the link in the chat. It is a fantastic opportunity and spots fill up quickly, so please be sure to secure your place soon. Now, before we officially close, we'd love to hear from you. We're opening the floor for a Q&A session. Feel free to raise your hands, and we will take the questions in order. Thank you.
Okay, Tayo, before we do so, I'd like to speak to the audience about a little bit of the importing and exporting course that's going to be offered. For those of you who are interested in importing, I can give you an overview of what we cover. In class, we're going to cover, what is CBP? And we're going to talk about other import agencies. There's a number of agencies out there that do have jurisdiction over imports. Who are they and what do they do? We're going to talk about informed compliance, reasonable care, and we're going to talk about the customs regulations. And it's something that you should know about. We're also going to talk about U.S. customs brokers. Some of you may want to become a customs broker in the future. And we can, we can address that. We're going to talk about such basic documents as a power of attorney. We're going to talk about bonding. This course is designed not to give you philosophy, but we're going to concentrate on real forms. We're going to concentrate on what customs concentrates on and these other importing agencies. So it's basically, no fooling around. I could recommend books to you if you want an overview of international trade. That's wonderful. But we concentrate on the nuts and bolts. Okay, that's what it's all about. The idea is to help you, if you're in international trade, do better with a company or do better with your own business, but you may also want to get into the business. And if you want to go with a company, it'd be very nice for the person interviewing you to know that you know a lot about importing and you know about such things as a harmonized tariff schedule that I mentioned before, that it's a classification of goods. And when it comes to importing, you know about valuation, and we're going to go over certain forms, that's Form 28 and 29. You're going to know about the entry process, and you're going to know about documentation, special invoices that customs needs, and you're going to know about security filings that customs requires. And then we're also going to talk about Incoterms 2020, and that's for anybody involved in international trade. You need to know about that. Also, marking. Marking is the #1 problem for importers, and you're going to learn about cargo inspections. What are these customs officers doing? You're also going to learn about record keeping, and God forbid you get involved with fines and penalties and forfeitures. What do you do about these people? And we're going to go over protests. If you disagree with a customs action, you can protest. You can say, listen, customs, you're wrong. And quite often customs is wrong. And there's a way that you can argue, and you'll know how to do that. You'll point to certain regulations and things, and we'll do that. And there's also Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. That's a security program that Customs offers. And you're going, if you want to take this course, there's no prior experience needed if it comes to importing. And you're going to wind up with a lot of study materials. I give you a lot of handouts. You're going to have a big electronic library. You're going to wind up with an electronic book importing into the U.S. And again, I don't give exams and I don't give quizzes, but I do require homework from you. And there's no reason for you not to really know a lot about importing. You'll know more about importing than the U.S. Customs offices out there. You really will. Because again, we're concentrating on nuts and bolts. And if you're interested in exporting, and I know many of you are, I just saw something come up on chat, we go over what is an export. A lot of people don't understand what an export is. We go over popular export myths, then we go over the export enforcement agencies. Who are these agencies and where they located and what do they do? And then we're going to go over various export laws and regulations. We go over export documentation. We go over the export order process. You learn how to protect your company, protect yourself. You have to screen people. You have to make sure that certain goods don't go to people out there who shouldn't receive these goods. The federal government has lists. They're called the bad guy lists. And again, you don't want to get foul up that way. And there's an easy way to prevent that. You can do your due diligence. It's very easy to not be declared a violator of export laws. And in many ways, in exporting, um, is a bit easier in many respects from importing. You're going to learn about the harmonized tariff schedule system, which is used in exporting. But you have to watch it with exports because once you make a mistake, it's kind of hard to correct. You don't want to get involved with missing things that you should do when it comes to exporting. And then we go over packing and insurance. We go over freight forwarders. We go over the export power of attorney. We do that from day one. And then we learn about the electronic export information. We learn about the AES system and getting paid. We learn about record keeping, penalties, and of course, CTPAT, Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. So that's what's offered. It's an import-export course, and I look forward to being on board. It's a lot of fun, and you really will learn a lot, and you'll have a big library for yourself. Okay. Well, Tayo, thank you very much. Okay. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you again, Martin. For your convenience, everyone, the link to the course is available in the chat, and you can scan the QR code to access our registration page and get all of the details to the course that's coming up on March 24th. Once again, we're opening the floor for a Q&A session, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to speak. I see a question from Terrence Forbes. Professor Behr, Terrence is asking, does increased tariffs in the U.S. supposedly cause U.S. companies to come back to the U.S. because consumers aren't willing to purchase their products anymore because of the increased tariff?
It's a very good question, and it's one that you hear all the time. Will manufacturing ever come back to the United States? Some of it may, and that's one of the reasons that the president right now is using tariffs the way he is. He wants certain companies to come back. Again, we've seen this happen in the automobile industry. You have a lot of auto companies located in the southern part of the United States. That's happening. But do I really think that manufacturers are going to come back en masse? No, I don't. And the reason for it is because the United States is very expensive to do business in. Other countries have, they have to do things in terms of transportation. They provide education to people having problems with that, healthcare. It's very expensive to live in the United States. And again, we also have to worry about, do we have the educated population that we need to do this? In many cases, yes, we do. And a lot of people are saying we should offer more in terms of workforce development, and people need help to understand what's going on. It's one of the things NJCU does. It provides information about international trade. One of the few schools to do that. But as far as manufacturing come back, it's not just bringing manufacturing back, it's keeping it here. And when it comes to keeping industry here, we've got to worry about automation too. Businesses want to make as much profit as they can. They don't necessarily want a lot of employees. They're not in the business of providing employment. And they also, are not in the business of wanting to spend a lot of money. And they're worried about being taxed. But they'll also make use of AI. And that's what they want to do. I think certain industries will return, but I don't think you're going to see the 1950s again in the United States or the 60s where you had the, industries going full blast and so on. But there are going to be certain industries, perhaps chip makers, automobile, few other things. Yes, I do think there's a possibility of some of those industries coming back. Okay, any other question out there? Anybody want to? We're going to talk about this. If you want to take this import, export agent training class, we talk about issues like this. Again, but with respect to the forms, with respect to the policies, the regulations that these agencies are using. Okay, so if you have any kind of questions, please get a hold of NJCU. You can get a hold of me. I'll make myself available. Again, we don't have the time right now to go over everything, but I will make myself available to you. And if you're thinking about taking the course, we can talk about that as well. All right. Anybody else have any other questions out there? Feel free to ask. There's no such thing as a bad question.
Martin, we have another question. John Batista is asking, how does the import and export certification course touch upon the following subject: globalization, global business supply chain management, procurement, and logistics?
We cover all that in this class. Okay, those are subjects that are going to be covered. How do you find suppliers? And what do you do if you have a supply chain? How do you protect it? One of the reasons I talk about, say, Customs has a security program called CTPAT, Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. How do you go about finding suppliers? How do you do due diligence? How do you find out about the people you're dealing with? You don't want to get hurt. You don't want to deal with with dirty people. And we're going to talk about things as I talk about the bad guy lists. We talk about globalization. I also give a history of customs. Where did these agencies come from? We're going to go over the history of tariffs. How did this come about? What happened in 1913? Creation of the, Internal Revenue Service. Up until that time, customs was the agency that brought in the most money to the government. And as a matter of fact, most of our buildings, most of the railroads, everything else is due to the collection of tariffs by U.S. Customs and U.S. Customs at that time. It was part of Treasury at that time. But very, very important to people in the United States, and perhaps the most important port of all. As a matter of fact, it was the most important Port of New York. And that's, you guys are close to that, most of you. We have the Port of New York, Newark. Most of the ships now, the ocean vessels, come into Newark. They used to come into the island of Manhattan. The ships are now too big, and that changed. They're called post-Panamax ships. We're going to talk about the use of containers and how that revolutionized shipping. We're going to be talking about ocean shipping. We're going to talk about air shipping. We're going to talk about trucks. We're going to talk about trains. What is the cheapest way to bring goods into the United States? And again, the course is going to cover all this kind of stuff, and you'll have the opportunity to ask me questions, whatever you want, and I will make myself available to you. There's a lot to go over, but again, we're going to concentrate on the nuts and bolts. It's basically no fooling around. I mean, it's not philosophy. We can talk about a lot of policy, why the government does certain things. I can recommend books to you, but you're going to have a huge library that you can draw upon. If you're already in international trade, this will help you. If you want a job in international trade, again, this course can help you. You'll know what you're talking about. Anybody interviews you, you will know that you know what's going on. And we have a big port. We have the Port of New York. Newark is the second biggest port in the United States. You only have Long Beach, California, LA, it's bigger. And then sometimes Newark is bigger. Okay, we're basically battling it out with the West Coast right now, but a lot is going on here right now. So you're nearby. There's a lot of importers and exporters around, a lot of employment, and we'll talk about that as well. We'll talk about companies and what's out there.
Thank you again, Martin. We have a few more minutes and they're still open to answering any questions you have. So please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will gladly call you to ask your question. In the meantime, please check out the links that are currently posted in the chat. We have a link to the import-export program so that you can get full course details, the registration information, and how to pay for the course. We also have a feedback form that we would like you to take a moment to complete for us. We want to know how your experience was with this webinar so that we can improve our offering even more. So please take a moment to click on that link. Less than 60 seconds, you should be able to complete that form. Our email address is also posted in the chat, cont@njcu.edu. If you have any additional questions beyond now, Martin or any of the staff of Adult and Continuing Ed would be glad to assist you with the answers. We will be wrapping up our session in just a few more moments, but we will give opportunity for anyone who wants to ask any final questions.
Okay, Tayo, I'd like to address the audience again. As far as the course is concerned, you can do it. It's a no-stress course. One of the reasons I'm not giving exams and quizzes because I want you to think about what we're going over in class, and you'll be handing in homework assignments. But it's no stress, very little, and everybody can do very well. For those of you who don't have much in the way of credentials, getting a certificate from New Jersey City University can mean a lot to an actual employer or a prospective employer, because they'll know that you know what you're talking about. Okay. And as Ken mentioned before, very few schools offer anything like this. Okay. Again, Pace University used to have something like this. Doesn't anymore. Baruch College used to have something like this. Doesn't anymore. So FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology. I thought all these schools used to teach something like this, but they don't, because they don't have, I'm just fortunate enough that I have been in customs in the government for a number of years. And I enjoy talking about this stuff because it's part of my life. And I really enjoy, as I said, being part of NJCU.
Thank you
We
so
have
much.
someone to raise their hand.
Yeah, sure.
Sunum Khan has a question. Sunum, please go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
And let me view what we have here.
Not have an experience in export and imports, right? And I want to do business regarding this topic. So can this course will be helpful for me?
Yeah, it'll be very helpful to you. Again, and I enjoy questions, but we cover all the major areas of importing and exporting. And I tell you where you can continue your education. I mean, you can continue with NJCU. We'll be offering webinars and other courses in the future. But there are also from a lot of free resources out there that people don't know about. I'll give you one of them right now. If you don't know anything about importing or exporting, always remember this website, www.cbp.gov. And that's Customs and Border Protection, www.cbp.gov. Go there. There's a lot of free information. There's a lot of guides and so on. And as a matter of fact, if you take the course, we're going to be making use of the Customs website quite often. They've got a lot of guides. They've got a lot of things there that are available to help you understand what's going on in terms of international trade. This stuff is not rocket science, but often it's not presented the right way. And a lot of times people get upset, or they're fearful of the language that's being used, because a lot of language is used by a lot of agencies that's phony, it's wooden, what have you. And we break it down into plain English, and then you get to pick up the ball and run with it. But I will always make myself available to you. I mean, I think of myself as a teacher, but also as a mentor. And it's an interesting part of the world. It's an interesting industry, international trade. And as you know, that the United States is not going to stop importing or exporting. We're talking a lot about tariffs right now. But again, when it comes to importing, it's not going to stop. The port of Newark is only going to get bigger, and the United States is only going to import more in the way of product. So we'll talk about how you can source from countries that if you buy their goods, those goods will come in at a free rate of duty. And we'll talk about the process by which you can have this free rate of duty. All right, so we're talking about real stuff, and I'd be happy to have you on board.
Wonderful. We have one final question from John Batista. What are thoughts on the egg flu outbreak in the U.S., and how would this affect the U.S. economic and exporting economy?
Well, I'm sorry, what was that question again? I just missed that. What was it about?
What are thoughts on the egg flu outbreak in the U.S., and how would this affect the U.S. economy and exporting, I believe?
Well, we'll see. I mean, the United States is in, again, some big changes are happening, and most of the American public not aware of what's going on. I told you before, start thinking about BRICS. You can think about algorithms and so on. We can think about cryptocurrency. We see that President Trump is looking at cryptocurrency. I think there's going to be big changes when it comes to the reserve currency of the world, the US dollar. And right now, countries all over the world are using the US dollar, and they're sending the US dollar back to the United States. They're buying US bonds with it, okay? And again, that's why we haven't been taxed. So that's why a lot of corporations have escaped taxes for so long, because the United States government is now borrowing money. It doesn't tax people anymore. Although Trump is talking about these tariffs, in that case, yes, there will be collection of taxes. But for the most part, we've been very lucky over the past 50 years. Neoliberalism is something that the United States has embraced, basically called free trade. And a lot of empires, and the United States has one, embraces free trade when it's on top. And there's a lot of things going on right now, but we'll see how the government is going to be impacted by all the layoffs. As a matter of fact, Trump is now talking about a new agency. It's called the External Tariff Service. He wants to do away with the IRS. But Customs is the agency that's already collecting external tariffs. Why do we need a new agency? This is another something that we're going to talk about. But again, if you come on board with the course, we're going to talk about the basics. We're going to talk about how do you get if you want to create a business. A lot of people, start importing and exporting companies out of their houses or out of their apartments. That's also possible. But we're going to talk about nuts and bolts. And again, we're going to talk about the basics, and we're going to talk about a lot of advanced topics at the time. But you're going to have the ability after taking this course to go for either side of the street, importing or exporting, and people are going to recognize you for the training that you do have, and it's going to help you. Okay. All right. Any more questions? Anything else out there? And again, please feel free to contact me anytime you want.
Thank
Hi.
you so much.
Oh, I just had a question I was gonna ask. Are you located at the School of Business?
Excuse me? The School of
Are you-
Business?
Yeah. Do you have an office?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm in the importing game. I have a law office in Hillside, New Jersey. I'm also as kind of affiliated with GRVR attorneys. I help out importers and exporters. Sometime I can invite you to where I am because there's a warehouse there and I can show you all kinds of things. And, we're going to talk about the port and we're going to talk about realities that you need to know about. And there's a lot of opportunity out there. And there's a lot of jobs that are not being addressed right now because people don't know about them. Many of you pass the port, I'm sure, on the turnpike. You've been near it, but you don't understand what's going on there. And there's a lot going on in and around the port. And again, if you have a business background, that can only help you. If you're taking this type of course, I mean, it's good to have one. In the past, I've taught business courses as well. But again, this is business. We're talking about importing and exporting, and they're invaluable to the United States, and they're never going away. Okay, it's a growth area, both sides of the street.
I'm sorry, by any chance, can you give us your email?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Taya will give it to you. I can
That'll
give it
be
to you right
posted in
now.
just a moment.
Yeah, I give it to you right now. It's my initials. M is in Martin. K is in Kenneth or Kilo. B as in Bravo or Bear. At Behr Law. And that's B is in Bravo. E is in Echo. H is in Hotel. R is in Romeo. L is in Lima. A is in Alpha. And W is in whiskey.com, mkb@behrlaw.com. Get a hold of me anytime, okay?